Hi, this is Miss Hale, and these are your respiratory system notes. The respiratory system is actually pretty simple. Air enters through your nose or your mouth, travels down your trachea, and ends up in your lungs. So we're going to talk first about the different structures that you see in the respiratory system. Before we do that, here are some functions. The main function of the respiratory system is to exchange gases between the blood and your external environment. So it brings in oxygen and it removes carbon dioxide. And this gas exchange process occurs within the alveoli of the lungs, and we'll get into those more specifically later. The passageways that go to the lungs purify the air, they humidify the air, and they make it more moist, and they warm the incoming air so that it's not going directly to your lungs as cold, dry air. So your air pathway, as an oxygen molecule or an oxygen molecule coming in, would start in your nose, which is the only visible part of your respiratory system. It enters through your nostrils and goes into your nasal cavity. So here's your nose here, it would enter through the nostrils and go into the nasal cavity up here. Your nasal cavity is lined with mucus, and you guys know that is snot. And that moistens the air and also traps any incoming particles so they don't make it all the way to your lungs. Within your nasal cavity, you also have sinuses. So right here is a sinus, and right here is a sinus. And what those do, those are cavities within your bone. And they have multiple functions. They lighten the skull, they help produce mucus, and they also make your speech sound the way it does. They cause your speech to resonate. So those are the functions of the sinuses. Again, here and here. When the air has gone through the nasal cavity, it's going to go into the pharynx or the throat. So the pharynx is all the way from this part of your nasal cavity all the way down to here. And it goes to, once you get to the larynx, you're done with the throat. So the larynx is going to be right here. What the larynx does is it routes the air and the food into the proper channels. So it makes sure the air is going through your trachea and your food going through your esophagus. And it plays a role in your speech as well. So your vocal cords are found there. It's made of 8 rigid hyaline cartilages, rings of them, and then a spoon-shaped flap, and that is called your epiglottis. So your larynx has thyroid cartilage, which is the largest of your hyaline cartilage, and it protrudes anteriorly. So right here is your larynx. So your Adam's apple, if you're a boy, or just this bump right here if you're a girl, is the hyaline cartilage on your larynx. It also has an epiglottis, which protects the top opening, and it makes sure that the food goes to the esophagus and the air goes towards the trachea. So when you swallow, the epiglottis actually lifts and forms a lid over the opening so that food can't get in. Then within your larynx as well are your vocal folds, and vocal folds vibrate with expelled air, and that's how you create speech. And within those folds there's a glottis, which is the opening between the vocal folds. Once you get past the larynx, the air enters the trachea. The trachea is a 4-inch long tube, and that connects the trachea connects the larynx with the bronchi. The trachea is actually reinforced with hyaline cartilage all the way down, and that keeps it open when you're bending your neck especially. And it's lined with ciliated mucus. So here we have the cilia here, and the mucus again is to trap any incoming particles as well as moisten the air. At the end of the trachea, it splits off into the primary bronchi. And then those are going to split off into smaller and smaller branches in the lungs. So here we have a lung, and here we have the other lung, and you can see another picture right there. And then if we're talking about the lungs as a whole, they occupy most of your thoracic cavity, so from your diaphragm all the way up to your where your clavicle is. And the base of the lung rests directly on the diaphragm. Each one is divided. The right lung has 3 lobes, and because of the location of the heart, the left lung only has 2 lobes. So as the bronchi keep dividing within the lungs, you get your primary bronchi, which would be the first division, secondary, which is the second division, and tertiary, which is the third. And then we go into bronchioles as well as terminal bronchioles. So terminal bronchiole is right at the end of one of those bronchioles. You can see a picture of that here. At the end of the bronchioles, of the terminal bronchioles, you have your alveoli, and that's where your gas exchange is going to occur. Alveoli are covered with pulmonary capillaries, and on one side of the membrane is going to be air, and then the other side is going to be blood. And so you're going to exchange gas that way. This is a picture, so this is be your alveoli, and here are your blood vessels all the way along. And they're very, very small capillaries so that we can exchange a lot of gases and exchange them efficiently. So here we have your alveoli. Oxygen is going from the alveoli to the blood, and carbon dioxide is going from the blood to the alveoli to be released. So gas exchange, again, only occurs in the alveoli, and it crosses by simple diffusion, so there's no energy required. And alveoli are very small sacs of air, and they can close in on themselves very easily. And so there's a molecule called surfactant that coats any gas-exposed area of the alveoli. Surfactant actually is not formed in the fetus until very late, and so usually if you are significantly premature as a baby, you need to get surfactant injections or surfactant added to your alveoli. And so one of the main reasons that premature babies have trouble breathing is because they have not produced surfactant. Okay, so when you're breathing, you have four main events. You have your pulmonary ventilation, so that's what you would call breathing. Then you have the gas exchange between the pulmonary blood, the blood in the lungs, and the alveoli, which is your external respiration. Then that gas gets transported, so that's called respiratory gas transport, and that's via the bloodstream. So that's when the oxygen is actually going to your body tissues. And then finally you have internal respiration, which is when the oxygen from the blood goes into the tissue cells and the carbon dioxide from the tissues goes into the blood. So the pulmonary ventilation portion has two phases. You have inspiration or inhalation, which is air into the lungs, like that, and expiration or exhalation, which is air leaving the lungs. So in and exit. When you inspire or inhale, your diaphragm is actually going to contract, as well as your external intercostal muscles, or the muscles in between your ribs. This causes the size of the thoracic cavity to increase, and air is pulled into the lungs. This is due to the increase in volume as well as a decrease in pressure. Okay, so this is a picture. The diaphragm is going to move down. It's going to make a bigger thoracic cavity. Your ribs are going to expand, and you're going to breathe in. Expiration is actually mostly passive because your muscles are just relaxing, and so air is pushed out because there's a decrease in volume as well as an increase in pressure. You can force expiration, which is like forced breathing out, because you can, and what you'll do is contract your rib cage even more in order to do that. And so a picture of this, diaphragm moves up, the ribs move in. And it's relaxation of your muscles, so it's very passive. Okay, so then last is respiratory volumes and capacities, second to last actually. So there's 4 different volumes and capacities you should know, including tidal volume, which is not written here. So tidal volume, or shortened to TV, is what you normally breathe without forcing it, just what you breathe in and what you breathe out. An inspiratory reserve volume is the amount of air that you can take in forcibly over your tidal volume. Expiratory reserve is the amount of air that can be forcibly exhaled. The residual volume is air that remains in your lungs even after a forceful exhalation. And then the vital capacity is the total amount of interchangeable air. So it's your tidal volume plus your inspiratory reserve plus your expiratory reserve. So that is the amount of air total that you can bring into your body. And then finally is the regulation of respiration. Your respiration is controlled in your medulla and your pons, and the reason, the most important stimulus for this is the amount of CO2 in your body. If there's a high level of CO2 in your body, you're going to breathe more. If there's a low level, you're going to breathe less. Obviously, there's a lot of other factors, but this actually is the most important stimulus for your respiratory rate. And that's it for respiration. Please write down any questions that you have and bring them to class next time. Thanks, guys.